Hey guys, today I'll show you a sci-fi thriller TV series named Brea, Season 2. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama takes place in Hollywood's Forest Park, where a mountain suddenly shakes violently, with large chunks of rock collapsing. A massive sinkhole formed before the shocking people. Terrified, they scattered in all directions. Yet a couple ran against the tide because their daughter was still at the foot of the mountain. Just then, a massive billboard came crashing down. When the dust settled, the little girl was luckily unharmed. However, a mysterious sinkhole had appeared on the hillside. The newly formed sinkhole was in fact a rift in time and space. Previously on Season 1, Eve fell into this sinkhole that appeared in Los Angeles and traveled back to 10,000 years ago. Her husband, Gavin, in search of his wife and son, also jumped into the ancient time-space from the Hollywood sinkhole. He ended up in Seattle, quite a distance from Los Angeles where his wife was. Gavin had no choice but to traverse the perilous primeval grassland on foot. Accompanying him were his daughter and their friend, Ella. It wasn't long before Gavin noticed footprints of varying sizes on the ground, indicating the presence of wildlife. He quickly warned everyone to be careful. However, Ella didn't heed the warning as she was starving. Gavin asked the two to wait, then ventured alone into the jungle. He examined the traces on the grassland and finally found a wild boar. Surprisingly, he forcefully threw his sharp wooden stick, piercing the boar straight through. But soon after, a massive rhinoceros emerged from the bushes. Gavin was no match for it and could only raise his hands in surrender and back away. In his panic, he tumbled down the hillside. Fortunately, the woolly rhino did not continue to pursue him. It glanced at him from a distance and then turned to leave. Gavin and his companions not only survived, but also got to enjoy a feast of roasted wild boar. Ella finally experienced the harshness of the primitive era. However, she did not regret coming here. She insisted on finding her sister no matter what. After a hearty meal, the group continued their journey, but Gavin felt uneasy, suspecting that the large rhinoceros was still trailing them. Everyone heightened their alertness. Sure enough, a rustling sound came from the bushes. The group held their breath and stared intently ahead. To their surprise, a chubby creature emerged from the bushes. Gavin let out a sigh of relief, and his daughter instantly reached out to pet it. The little creature soon scampered back into the bushes, heading in the same direction the group was moving. However, little did they know, the cute creature was a young rhinoceros. Seeing its parents, the group trembled with fear like chickens. But going back would likely lead them to the large rhinoceros that had been tracking them. Gavin decided to risk it. He threw his spear with all his might. The commotion indeed drove the rhinoceros family away, allowing Gavin and the others to slip past quietly. But his daughter stumbled, alerting one of the rhinos. Gavin quickly helped his daughter up, ready to run into the forest, only to see the pursuing rhinoceros appear right in front of them. They were surrounded by two enormous rhinoceroses. Gavin kept his cool. He crouched down, and the rhinoceroses leaped over him, starting to fight each other for their prey. Gavin quickly helped his daughter move away from the battlefield. When the three of them managed to cross the forest and reach a clearing, they were stunned by the sight before them. Several large iron signs were scattered across the grassland. Recognizing them as signs representing Hollywood, Gavin couldn't help showing a look of joy, knowing that Los Angeles was not far away. Meanwhile, Eve, who was at an ancient camp in Los Angeles, was in immense sorrow because her son Josh and friend Riley had been swept into the time-space portal. She didn't know if she would ever see them again. The kind-hearted Ty comforted her using words but not muscles, insisting that her family would reunite one day. Riley's father, Sam, was currently interrogating a local elder, Isaiah's grandfather, hoping to learn more about the time-space rift and find a way to save his daughter. But the old man was stubborn and didn't reveal any information. Sam was so angry that he was ready to explode. Someone persuaded him to stop, warning that their food was running low, and if they continued to torment the old man, they would offend the local tribe and starve. Ty told everyone to calm down. Sure enough, soon a group of tribespeople arrived at the camp with supplies. The tribal leader, Para, looked affectionately at Ty, which made sense since they had a budding romance. After some light-hearted banter, Para expressed her intention to take Isaiah's grandfather away. Although he had done some rash things, he was still part of their tribe. Ty objected, saying they needed to pry some useful information from him. Para compromised, showing that in front of love, all others are insignificant. Sam dragged the old man into the small forest and threatened him with a gun to reveal a way to save his daughter. The old man dared not be stubborn any longer. Although he couldn't save Sam and Eve's children, a woman named Rebecca could. She was the first person to voluntarily jump into the time-space portal after Eve and others fell into it, arriving in the Ice Age. She understood the time-space tunnel very well and surely had a way to save the children. Eve felt a bit lost because Rebecca had already left the camp, so where could they find her now? The old man stated that she must have gone to the Lazarus building in the north of the forest. The Lazarus building he spoke of was the same one that Rebecca and Scott had seen in the previous season. It stood tall on the plains of the Ice Age like a tower, made of glass and steel. It was like a beacon in the ancient plains. Just as Isaiah's grandfather suspected, Rebecca was preparing to go to this mysterious tower with Scott. She said she had an important mission to complete there, otherwise they would all be in big trouble. Scott pledged to follow Rebecca and headed towards the tower. After hearing the old man's story, Eve decided to go to the tower to find Rebecca, as it seemed the only way to find her son. However, Ty worried that the old man might be lying to divide them. Sam thought this could be possible and decided to stay behind to keep an eye on the old man. The task of finding Rebecca was left to Eve and Levi. Levi was overjoyed at the prospect of spending time alone with Eve, whom he had long been in love with. Just as they started their journey, they ran into Lucas from the camp. Beside him was a pile of stones, a grave for his mother, who had been injured in the abdomen during a fight with the natives and had bled to death. As they mourned silently, they heard shouting from not far off. They sneaked closer to take a look, only to find a group of natives had captured Veronica. They did not look like they were from Para's tribe. Veronica had accidentally stepped on a trap in the last season, and now she had been captured. Eve and the others decided to rescue her first, but they needed to find the right opportunity. Finally, when the group took a rest, Lucas quietly sent a signal to Veronica with some broken stones. She understood and started to distract the guards. Lucas took the opportunity to sprint out, with Levi following closely to block any assistance. Eve was in charge of finding the handcuff keys. The three of them worked together and quickly rescued Veronica, unlocking the makeshift handcuffs. However, not long after, a guard chased after them. Levi told the others to go first while he stayed behind. He dodged a flying spear and pulled the trigger in an instant. After finally taking out the guard, Levi hurried to the meeting point, but he didn't see Eve. As it turned out, she had heard the gunshot and worried about Levi's safety, decided to go back to check, but she was caught by the guards. As a result, they had rescued Veronica, but Eve ended up as a captive. Levi chose to reveal himself and willingly become a captive to stay with Eve. Eve was overcome with emotion, forgetting all about her shitty husband, Gavin. Meanwhile, Josh and his friend Riley woke up in a forest. In a daze, they stumbled upon the roadside, where they saw an old car roaring towards them. Then, a group of young people brushed past them, casually discarding an old-fashioned cassette tape. From these clues, Josh and Riley finally confirmed that they had traveled back to the year 1988. Following the road, they saw the little boy, Isaiah, being shoved into a car by two nuns. Isaiah was actually the young version of Josh's father, Gavin, in this timeline. Seeing that, Riley was about to intervene, but Josh stopped her, reminding her that Isaiah's growth path had returned to normal and they shouldn't interfere anymore. However, Riley thought of an important question. Now that her father was also a young boy at this time, didn't that make her and Josh superfluous in this world? For this profound question, they discussed for a long time without reaching a conclusion. Instead, they got hungry. Fortunately, they soon spotted a house. The owner was not at home, so Josh decided to let himself in. They began to eat like they hadn't eaten in 3 days. A voice message suddenly played from the phone, which made Josh and Riley happy because the message said the homeowner wouldn't be back until next week. However, not long after, Riley's face turned grim, knowing that she was supposed to spend a meaningless week here. After all, they did not belong to this world. The best course of action was to find a way to leave as soon as possible. So they began to gather supplies, and unexpectedly they saw a newspaper on the table. It said that a mysterious sinkhole had appeared in Hollywood's Forest Park. They realized that it must be a time-space portal to leave this world. Now, with a goal in mind, they packed their bags and set off for the Hollywood sinkhole. The scene shifts to Eve and Levi, who were captured by the natives and taken into a dimly lit mine. After a severe beating, they finally realized their situation. The leader treated them labor slaves and began to assign them jobs. They had to mine enough ore. But Eve and Levi wouldn't willingly mine, so they quietly approached a miner to get some useful information. He said the dozens of miners in the mine were all captured after falling into a sinkhole in Los Angeles. Eve wanted to know the origins of these natives, but the miner knew nothing. His advice to them was to keep their heads down and work. Otherwise, they would meet a terrible end. His words plunged Eve into deep guilt. If it weren't for her, Levi wouldn't have been involved in this hardship. The next day, Eve and Levi approached the old miner again, asking if there was any other exit besides the main entrance. He replied that there was a tunnel leading to the outside, but they needed a map. Levi felt it was more reliable to break through the main entrance. He asked the old miner to distract the guards while he would find a way to open the main passage. When the old miner contacted other workers, the tribal leader noticed the anomaly. He called his men to punish the old miner. Levi rushed to help him. As a result, he got his lessons and was dragged into the depths of the mine. On the other side, Eve's husband and daughter had made a long journey, finally arriving at the Los Angeles camp. They excitedly called out Eve's name, quickly drawing the attention of others. Sam rushed over to inquire. Gavin, who had recovered his childhood memories, mentioned how Sam had helped him bandage a wound when he was younger. Seeing the scar on Gavin's hand, Sam introduced him to the others, saying this was Isaiah, the boy who grew up to be the man Gavin they knew. Everyone is aware that he traveled through a time-space tunnel to the year 1988. They began to question Gavin on how he returned. However, Gavin only came to find his wife and son. The time-space portal that took him back had already closed. The crowd fell silent, and it was Lucas who broke the silence, saying that Eve and Levi were likely captured by the natives. Sam added that Gavin's son Josh had also traveled to the world of 1988. A series of bad news left Gavin in tears. He had thought that after all the hardships, his family would finally be reunited here, but that was not the case. However, Gavin did not give up. Lucas informed him that Eve was taken by natives clad in armor and riding horse carts. Gavin immediately recalled that his grandfather had once mentioned these people. They were called the Exiles, known for enslaving others to do their bidding. The mention of his grandfather made Sam uncomfortable since the old man Gavin referred to was the one they had captured. He immediately led Gavin to the tent where his grandfather was held. Ty didn't forget to remind Gavin that the old man was dangerous. Gavin understood and then entered the tent alone. The meeting between the grandfather and grandson after many years was awkward. Perhaps because of their blood relation, the grandfather recognized Gavin at first sight, but showed no sign of excitement. Gavin didn't come to reminisce. He was there to find the exact location of the exiles to rescue Eve. His grandfather agreed, but only on the condition that he be taken along, as it was a dangerous place. Gavin had been warned by Ty that the old man might use this opportunity to escape. However, the old man cornered Gavin by saying that if they were to wait any longer, the exiles could kill Eve at any moment. Left with no choice, Gavin decided to take his grandfather with him. Sam and others rushed to stop him, saying that the old man must not be allowed to leave and the leader of his tribe was waiting to take him back. However, Gavin was adamant. This was the only way to save Eve. Sam finally relented, reminding him to keep an eye on the old man. Then Gavin, with his grandfather whose hands were tied, set off towards the camp of the exiles. At every location they went to, his grandfather would reminisce about how he taught Gavin to hunt in the old days. However, Gavin was not moved by such sentimentalities. He clearly remembered how his grandfather had previously tried to prevent him from returning to the year 1988. His children nearly lost their lives because of this. Surprisingly, his grandfather insinuated that everything he did was to protect Gavin. Yet, Gavin trusted his own judgment and believed that his grandfather was still hiding crucial information. Until all the mysteries were unveiled, he would not trust his grandfather. The old man looked heartbroken, saying he should not treat his grandpa that way. Gavin got irritated, urging the old man to tell him where his parents were now. As the old man was about to respond, a sudden noise from the distance caught their attention. Gavin anxiously scanned his surroundings. Suddenly, he stepped on a concealed trap and fell into the air. His grandfather hurriedly picked up the dropped dagger and disappeared in a flash. Gavin had to curse his grandfather angrily. Unexpectedly, a huge bear emerged from the jungle. Gavin, hanging from a tree, tried to stay calm. As he watched the bear draw nearer, he failed to come up with a plan. Just when he thought he was done for, the bear roared like a goose and collapsed. It turned out his grandfather had come to his rescue in time. Their estrangement was reduced, and they quickened their pace forward. They soon arrived at a hill where the grandfather mentioned there was a back door on the side of the hill used by the exiles. They would have to wait until dark to sneak in. The grandfather, now much more sincere, initiated a conversation about Gavin's parents. He said they were actually living in this timeline, but their circumstances were extremely dangerous, so he had never told Gavin. Gavin wanted to ask more, but the old man refused to reveal anything further, stating it was time to find the exiles. Gavin closely followed behind him until they hid behind a huge rock. He signaled for Gavin to drink some water and not to rush. However, not long after, Gavin suddenly felt dizzy. It seemed something had been mixed into his water bottle. The next moment, he passed out on the grass. His grandfather, ignoring him, had left him there. Meanwhile, Eve anxiously awaited news from Levi. Before long, an injured Levi was dragged back. Eve cried out in pain, fearing she would never see him again. Unable to suppress her love, she kissed him. They both lost control and fell into hormone yoga. Meanwhile, Gavin was discovered by the native guards. Without a doubt, he was also brought to the hormone-smelly cave. It would surely be an awkward encounter when Gavin met with his wife Eve and his best friend Levi. Initially, Gavin was filled with hatred for his grandfather, but soon found something in his pocket, vaguely recalling that his grandfather had placed it there when he was unconscious. To his surprise, it was a map of the tunnels. With this, Gavin could help Eve escape the cave. Meanwhile, Josh and Riley, who had time-traveled back to 1988, were actively searching for a way to return to their loved ones. They quickly arrived by the sinkhole that had recently appeared in Hollywood, knowing that it must contain a time portal. If they could find a way to jump in, they might be able to time-travel back to the prehistoric era. However, the area around the sinkhole was under strict guard, making it nearly impossible for them to approach. Riley thought it wasn't the right time to act. If they were caught by the police, who knew how long they would be detained? They decided to come back at night. Unbeknownst to them, their conversation was overheard by a man in glasses. When Josh and Riley were enjoying 80s food at an amusement park, they accidentally spotted the man in glasses who had been following them. Riley confronted him, and he quickly confessed everything. It turned out he was a well-known local geology professor who had been studying the sinkhole for many years. There had been several such sinkholes appearing continuously over the years, each time with unusually intense energy waves. The professor had deduced a pattern based on the parameters. He predicted that a gigantic sinkhole would appear in the city center in 4 days, causing a tsunami with immeasurable damage. Frustratingly, whenever he warned others about the dangers of the sinkhole, people thought he was crazy. Fortunately, after overhearing Josh's conversation, he believed Josh could provide some unknown information. With this, the professor might be able to present concrete evidence to convince the authorities. Josh and Riley agreed, deciding to abandon their plan to leave through the Hollywood sinkhole. They insisted they would share everything they knew to help convince everyone of the impending sinkhole disaster. On Eve's side, she and Levi contacted the old miner again and planned to escape from the case when the exiles switched shifts at noon. At that time, the cave's main door would be briefly opened. However, what Eve didn't expect was that her husband Gavin had also arrived at the cave. They bumped into each other at the ore recycling spot. Eve couldn't believe her husband had not only time-traveled to the timeline, but also braved the dangers of the cave to find her. It wasn't long before Levi noticed the sudden appearance of Gavin. The two former comrades embraced, though there was an awkward air between Levi and Eve. However, Gavin didn't notice anything amiss and started to talk seriously about his escape plan. He had a map with a clear marker of a hidden exit. They just needed to sneak past without being noticed by the guards. But when Eve and Levi found out that the map was left by Isaiah's grandpa, they both lost confidence in the plan because they didn't trust the old man at all. Instead, they decided it would be better to break through the main gate with the other miners. Seeing that even Eve wouldn't side with him, Gavin had to temporarily abandon his plan. When noon came, the exile's shift change went as expected. Levi gave everyone a sign, and the old miner clutched his chest, pretending to have a heart attack. When the guards went to check, the hiding two attacked and knocked down the two guards. Then Levi shouted, leading the miners towards the main door. The few guards present couldn't stop their advance. Seeing the situation go south, the gatekeeper lowered the cave door. Levi quickly moved forward and knocked down the gatekeeper, while Gavin struggled to hold the lock to prevent the door from falling. After all the miners escaped from the cave, he told Levi to leave as well. Gavin then performed a daring stunt, rolling out of the cave just as the gate was falling. The The reinforcement of the exiles arrived so timely, instantly surrounding all the miners. Seeing that the opponents were all wielding weapons, Levi and others exchanged glances and chose to surrender. The leader of the exiles wanted to imprison them all, but Gavin claimed that he was solely responsible for the plan. He was clearly trying to take all the blame. After a brief thought, the leader decided to take advantage of this situation. There was a heavy mining task recently, and now that someone had confessed, he could conveniently shift the blame. He planned to give Gavin a good beating while the others continued mining. Poor Gavin was thrown into the dungeon, with the leader planning to execute him that night. Gavin shouted in the native language, claiming he was not an outsider. Unexpectedly, the leader reduced Gavin's punishment. However, a severe beating was still inevitable. When Gavin was released, he was weakened. Eve felt a pang of heartache. She finally realized that he wasn't the same man who used to drink all day, lost in his dreams. Instead, he had reverted to the responsible man he once was. Eve couldn't help but wonder if she should distance herself from the poor Levi now. Just then, the leader commanded all the miners to move to another mine. The tower needed more ore. Levi was shocked by the command. He deliberately lagged behind and knocked out the rear guard. He then went to Gavin's cell and suggested that since nobody was in this tunnel, they could use the map to find the hidden exit. Though Gavin was somewhat incapacitated, the mine guards had already been relocated. Following the map, they quickly reached the hidden exit. Unexpectedly, they ran into the leader, but he was alone, and Levi and his group quickly knocked him down. Gavin could have killed the leader, but he chose to spare his muscular life. Finally, Eve, Levi, and Gavin managed to escape from the mine. Little did they know the survivors' camp was about to face a huge crisis. For some reason, Scott, who had been traveling to the tower with Rebecca, suddenly appeared in the camp. He told everyone that he and Rebecca had encountered a herd of mammoths on the way and got separated. Everyone became anxious. Only Rebecca knew how to save Josh and Riley, who had time traveled to 1988. Had she not shared information about the tower before? Strangely, the honest Scott pretended to know nothing. Just then, the tribal leader Para and her men arrived again at the survivors' camp. But this time, they were not here to deliver supplies. Seeing Para's icy expression, Ty felt something was wrong. As expected, Para insisted on taking Isaiah's grandfather. He had many supporters in the tribe. Even Para couldn't resist the pressure and had to come to claim him. Unfortunately, since Gavin had taken the old man away, there had been no word from him. Ty could only plead with Para for a few more days of grace, but Para got infuriated. She declared that she would sever all ties with the survivor and take back all the food previously delivered. The survivors were stunned. They probably had to start eating dirt from tomorrow. But facing the fully armed natives, they could only watch helplessly. After Para's tribe left with the food, the useless bunch started discussing whether to eat wild mushrooms or tree roots for dinner. Sam suggested trying hunting or fishing. Everyone was silent. Eating ready-made food was fine, but only Eve was good at hunting. Lucas suggested that since they had a sizable number, they might as well raid Para's tribe for food. Sam and Ty immediately opposed it. They didn't even have weapons, and it was highly immoral. Surprisingly, Scott supported Lucas's raiding plan. Sam had to let everyone vote. The majority were against fighting with the local natives. Lucas had already given up the idea, but Scott came over to instigate again. Since everyone wasn't willing to raid, a few of them could go to Para's tribe and steal some food. This made Lucas feel strange. He thought that after going out with Rebecca, Scott behaved differently from before, but Scott became serious, stating that nothing was more terrifying than hunger. Veronica wanted to oppose, but Lucas had saved her life before, so she eventually chose to join. In the quiet depth of night, Lucas, Scott, and others had already reached the vicinity of the tribe. Instead of choosing to infiltrate from the main entrance, they climbed in through a secret side door. This was the same exit they had used to escape the tribe a few weeks prior. Scott accidentally tripped and claimed to have sprained his ankle, requiring rest. He instructed Lucas and Veronica to go ahead and steal the food. As soon as they were out of sight, Scott abruptly stood up and hurried off in another direction, showing no signs of injury. Clearly, he had an ulterior motive. Scott was seen muttering coordinates under his breath and went straight into Isaiah's grandfather's room, where he began searching around. Eventually, he found a metal card in a book. On the other side, Lucas and Veronica saw a familiar figure, believing that the bald man was the one who had killed Lucas's mother. Veronica, sensing the situation was about to go awry, hastily pulled Lucas into an empty room. Killing the bald man now wouldn't change anything, but would only deepen the sense of guilt. But Lucas didn't listen, rushing out of the room. He followed the bald man to a house. Peeking through the door, he saw the bald man happily playing with his own child. This scene moved Lucas. He had grown up with his mother and knew how pitiful a child without a father could be. Lucas stood at the doorway for a long time, eventually abandoning the idea of avenging his mother. He then found Veronica, who had finished collecting food, expressing his wish to leave as soon as possible. After meeting up with the waiting Scott, the three returned to the survivors' camp, bringing with them fresh food, which delighted everyone. Only Sam and Ty looked sick with worry. Afterward, Scott had already left the camp on his own, heading deep into the forest. It turned out he was there to meet Rebecca. His earlier act of infiltrating the old man's home and stealing the metal card was at her behest. Rebecca was thrilled to get the card she wanted, though Scott was unhappy about having to deceive his friends for her sake. Rebecca, however, had him under her control, stating that only with this card could they reach the tower and save his friends from the impending crisis. As for the nature of the crisis, Rebecca remained mysterious, simply asking Scott to wait for news back at the camp. Meanwhile, Eve and the others were about to reach the camp. However, they were puzzled as to why the tower, as mentioned by the exiles, required so much burnable ore. Eve couldn't bother with that for now, saying that once they returned to the camp, she would find a way to rescue the captured miners. Gavin reminded her to be prepared to see her daughter. Upon hearing this, Eve looked shocked and ran towards the camp. The mother and daughter, who had been separated for several months, were finally reunited, and tears filled Eve's eyes. She had never thought she would see her daughter again. No sooner had they settled in than they faced a new challenge. A thick mist suddenly rose within the camp. Gavin recognized this as a terrifying natural phenomenon of the local area. If the mist persisted for several minutes, visibility would be reduced to almost zero. Still, Gavin couldn't wait. He was determined to go to the tower to find Rebecca and rescue his son, who had traveled back to 1988. Scott came to Gavin and told him that Rebecca was nearby, but Gavin had to meet her alone. Their conversation was overheard by Eve, who was not at all comfortable with this. She insisted on joining him, but Gavin managed to persuade her to stay at the camp. As he left, he tried to share a warm hug, but Eve avoided it because Levi happened to pass by. Gavin seemed to have sensed something fishy, but he quickly disappeared into the thick mist. He did not go directly to the tower, but under Scott's guidance, planned to meet Rebecca first. Roars of beasts echoed through the dense fog from time to time. Gavin promptly pulled Scott to hide behind the bushes, expressing his doubts about what was in the tower that could save his son. Scott mentioned that Rebecca had once told him there was a portal inside the tower that could lead to the future. As they talked, a figure suddenly emerged from the mist. It was Rebecca, the person they were looking for. Back at the camp, Lucas, who felt that Scott was acting strangely since his return, went to the forest to see what he was up to. However, instead of finding Scott, he stumbled upon a few strong men from Para's tribe. It turned out that Lucas's earlier theft of their food had been discovered, and they planned to attack the survivors' camp to vent their anger. Upon hearing this, Lucas and his companion rushed back to the camp to inform Sam, who was furious and asked why they stole their food. Lucas was a bit rebellious, saying that everyone enjoyed the food this morning. Veronica interrupted the quarrel. Sam looked at the thick fog surrounding them. They couldn't run now, they had to fight. He immediately gathered the survivors for discussion and noticed the weapons in the camp were few. A frontal assault would definitely not work. Eve suggested using a big fire to attract the enemy's attention. Sam approved the plan and instructed everyone to gather combustible materials. However, Ty was always feeling uneasy about declaring war on Para's tribe, insisting that this couldn't be Para's intention. Both Eve and Sam saw through this. They had to win this battle to begin negotiations. Thanks to everyone's efforts, the defense of the camp was quickly established, and all they had to do was wait for the enemy to come. Before long, a group of local aboriginals stormed into the survivors' camp, only to discover that these were decoys. Just as the survivors were about to counterattack, Para suddenly appeared with Gavin, and she ordered her men to drop their weapons. The survivors were curious to see Gavin, wondering why he was back here because he was supposed to have gone to the tower. It turned out, just a few minutes earlier, Gavin had met Rebecca and they had quickly figured out how to enter the tower. The black stones in the mine were the power source of the portal. They could hijack the goods, then disguise themselves as delivery men to infiltrate the tower. The room where the portal was located could only be opened with a card that Scott had previously stolen from Isaiah's grandfather. However, Gavin wondered why he was specifically chosen for this mission. Rebecca dropped another bombshell, saying that Gavin's parents were one of the founders of the tower. In addition to them, Rebecca and Isaiah's grandfather were also involved in its construction. However, they eventually had a falling out and went their separate ways. Just then, Para and a few tribe members appeared. She was pleased to see the grown-up Gavin. However, she quickly stated that some tribe members were planning to harm the camp, and Para was going to stop them. Gavin was panicked after hearing this because his wife and daughter were there. Despite Rebecca's objections, Gavin ended up returning to the camp with Para. Fortunately, they arrived not a moment too soon and managed to prevent the fight between the survivors and the natives. But suddenly, a beast's roar echoed through the dense fog, followed by a pack of ferocious wolves emerging. Everyone was shocked and frozen in fear. Eve couldn't help but scream like a chicken, and everyone started to scatter and seek refuge in the nearest shelter. Rebecca, who was trying to help Gavin find his wife and son, was knocked to the ground by a wolf. Gavin picked up a stick, knocked over the wolf, and together with Scott, dragged the injured Rebecca into a small car for shelter. In the midst of running, Eve saw the bald leader of Para's tribe fall to the ground. She ran over to help him. Suddenly, a wolf pounced at her, but it was Levi who came to the rescue. They quickly hid in a stinky toilet, which drove the wolf away. Eve and Levi risked their lives to save the man's bald life. After experiencing this, the bald man dropped his prejudice, stating that he would no longer trouble the survivors. Back in the camp, after Eve bandaged her wounds, she planned to meet her daughter, who was trapped in a dangerous situation inside a bus. As she expected, there were indeed quite a few survivors inside the bus, and several wolves were wandering outside, refusing to leave. Veronica was shivering in fear inside the bus. Suddenly, they heard footsteps on the roof of the bus, and everyone realized that the wolves had climbed up. Apparently, they were looking for a way in. Several wolves were desperately scratching at the roof. Before long, a hole appeared in the metal roof, and everyone inside turned pale in fear. Gavin rushed outside. He was worried about his trapped daughter, but met his wife rushing over. After a brief discussion, they came up with a daring rescue plan. The key to the plan was the flammable ore that Levi brought from the mine. At this time, the survivors trapped in the bus were in extreme danger, as the wolves could break in at any moment. Sam picked up a fire extinguisher and sprayed it at the hole, temporarily blocking the attack. But the fragile glass could not withstand several impacts. At this moment, Gavin crawled in from outside the bus, asking everyone to duck down like a duck. Outside the bus, Eve had already drawn her bow to full length. The arrow was fitted with the flammable ore. The next moment, the arrow accurately shot into the fire, causing a strong explosion. The intense flames shot up into the sky, causing the wolves to either die or flee. The people had finally survived this crisis. After going through this ordeal, Para's tribe and the survivors reconciled once again. Ty had hidden in a grove early on and luckily avoided the wolf attack. After a long time of reflection, Ty felt that he shouldn't stand against Para because of the survivors. Para was touched after hearing this, and the couple reconciled once more. Meanwhile, in the camp, Scott was in a panic because Rebecca's wound had worsened. Gavin and others rushed over. Seeing Rebecca in this condition, everyone was shocked. Rebecca seemed to know that her time was coming. She mustered all her strength to tell Gavin that he was not fighting alone. His mother would time travel back from 1988 to set things right. Before Gavin could understand what she meant, Rebecca closed her eyes forever. Everyone couldn't accept Rebecca's departure, but life had to go on. Gavin decided to continue with Rebecca's plan, to steal the ore from the mine, infiltrate the tower, and bring back their children. However, little did they know, Josh and Riley from 1988 were not in a hurry to find their way home, but were keen to provide evidence of the existence of the sinkhole to the wise but bald professor, whose hair was attached to his chin. Josh's mobile phone, which had been charged manually, was turned on again. The numerous photos stored in it were sufficient proof of the existence of the time-space portal. The professor decided to take the phone and find Dr. Caroline, a top expert in the field. If they could convince her to join, others would follow. But after seeing the pictures on the phone, Caroline thought they were all artificially made special effects. She didn't give Riley a chance to speak and left. Luckily, her assistant thought that Riley didn't seem to be lying, so they took them directly to Dr. Caroline's house. Josh and Riley finally got the chance to tell their detailed experiences of time travel. But when they mentioned the little boy Isaiah, Caroline was astonished because she was Isaiah's mother. Josh was even more shocked. He couldn't believe that the woman in front of him was his grandmother. Gavin was planning in the camp on how to infiltrate the mysterious tower, using the portal to rescue his son from 1988. After much thought, he felt that the most reliable way was to sneak in disguised as a mining team. Then they started their journey. Gavin had already guessed that his wife Eve had fallen in love with someone else. He still wanted to make an effort at this moment, hoping to salvage their relationship. As the two were talking, there was a sudden noise from the woods. Everyone stopped to look around. A haggard figure burst out from the bushes. Eve recognized him as the old miner who had escaped from the mine. The miner said that the exiles were preparing to close the mine and the guard force had more than doubled. Gavin and the others, undeterred, quietly went over to check. As the miner had said, the number of guards had indeed increased significantly. These guards were sorting the ore while counting the miners. It seemed they were going to split up. The convoy transporting the ore was heading east, while the miners were directed to another mine to the west. Everyone fell silent, wondering whether they should hijack the ore truck first or save the miners. Levi then suggested they split up for the mission. Gavin, his wife and daughter, along with Sam, were responsible for hijacking an ore truck. However, all the guards were gathered together. They decided to follow behind and wait for their chance. Unexpectedly, they had not walked far before they fell into a trap prepared by the exiles. Sam took out a lighter and discovered some bones not far away. It seemed they were not the first to arrive here. At this time, Gavin's daughter suddenly felt something on her back. Everyone couldn't help but gather in curiosity. It was a gigantic spider. Eve slapped it down, reassuring everyone it was fine. But then they found the ceiling and the ground crawling with spiders. Everyone was frightened and retreated. Sam used the small flame in his hand to fend off the spiders, but it was clearly ineffective. Fortunately, Gavin found a broken hole in the wall. This should be a tunnel dug during mining. Everyone hurriedly crawled out through the hole, and Gavin took the opportunity to seal it. However, they were still in danger as they were still in the mine. Gavin took out a map and found the location of the hidden exit of the tunnel. But when they were about to reach it, they found that the exit had been sealed. Everyone was a bit flustered. Now they could only leave through the main entrance. Sam volunteered to go ahead and scout. He left Gavin and his family of 3 behind, and the atmosphere became tense. But Gavin's daughter broke the silence. She felt her parents' relationship shouldn't be this way. Her greatest wish was for the family to return to the way it was before. This made Gavin and Eve feel awkward. Sam came back from the scout. He had found the way to the main entrance, but there were 4 guards along the way, and even more at the main entrance. After some discussion, they suddenly came up with an idea. A few individuals circled around the guards, striking them with shovels. 4 guards instantly fell to the ground. Gavin and the rest swiftly disrobed, intending to disguise themselves as guards. However, just as Eve began to remove her jacket, 2 more guards happened to pass by. Gavin quickly pulled Eve aside, both their gazes meeting as they held their breath. The intimate atmosphere almost made Gavin lose control, but Eve changed the subject, stating that it was time to change clothes. Clearly, she still harbored some resistance in her heart. On the other side, Levi, Scott, and Lucas planned to rescue the unfortunate miners. However, the number of escorting guards was several times more than usual, and the surrounding terrain was open, making a surprise attack difficult. Levi decided to go for reinforcements, as they were not far from Para's tribe. The remaining Scott and Lucas were responsible for keeping a close watch on the guards, waiting for reinforcements before taking action. They thought the task would be easy, but soon realized something was wrong. The group of guards planned to take the miners via a water route. Lucas realized that if they successfully boarded the ship, they would not be able to catch up. They had to stop them in time. Scott advised him to stay calm, arguing that it would be doom for just the 2 of them to approach now. But Lucas was determined, believing that some things can only be known after being done. Seeing that the miners were about to board, Lucas suddenly emerged from the bushes, provoking the guards. Seeing this, the guards drew their swords and angrily charged at Lucas. As the guards ran farther away, the hiding Scott suddenly appeared, lifting a torch and setting all the sailboats on the water surface ablaze. They had successfully delayed the miners. However, the guards suddenly turned around. Scott was taken aback and began to run for his life. Just as he was about to be caught, several sharp arrows suddenly flew from the sky. The pursuing guards fell one after another. It turned out that Levi had arrived with the Para tribe. Scott and Lucas embraced, weeping. The 2 had successfully completed their task. Next, they had to meet up with Eve and the others. At the main entrance of the mine, 4 guards pushed a mining cart and hurriedly left. It was Gavin and the others in disguise. They planned to use this mining cart to go to their final destination, the mysterious tower. However, not far ahead was another checkpoint, and the person guarding it was a sub-boss named Tamet, who was somewhat suspicious and asked a few questions. The main force had already set off for some time. Why were they so slow? Fortunately, Gavin also knew the local language. After calmly replying a few sentences, they were finally allowed to leave. Before long, a man in black emerged from the mine, reporting that several bound guards had been found. Tomet then realized that something was amiss with the 4 people who had just left in the mining cart. He quickly rallied his men to pursue them. Meanwhile, Sam and the others noticed the pursuers behind them. Everyone on the cart widened their eyes in surprise. Soon, Tomet and his men caught up with the mining cart, only to find it empty. As they were standing there in surprise, Gavin and the others suddenly appeared, catching Tomet off guard. However, they had overestimated their strength. At the critical moment, Levi burst out, charging at the guard who was holding Eve like a bull. Gavin was stunned. Sensing that the opponent's reinforcements had arrived, Tomet started running. Para picked up her bow and arrow and chased after him. After finding a good position, she prepared to shoot, but upon seeing Tomet's face, she was stunned and lowered her bow. Tai was confused as to why Para let him escape. Para hurriedly explained that she recognized Tomet, who was her husband. Everyone looked at her in disbelief. Para then explained that Tomet had once colluded with the exiles to harm the tribe. But Para discovered his intentions and exiled him from her tribe. Tomet then joined the exiles. Para paused for a moment, stating that she needed to return to prepare for her possible revenge. Gavin and the others decided to continue their journey to the tower to rescue Josh and Riley. Not long after, a magnificent modern tower appeared before everyone. The sight left Gavin and others in disbelief. On the other side, Josh and Riley, who were in the year 1988, unexpectedly met Gavin's mother, Caroline, who was also Josh's grandmother. After some conversations, they learned that Caroline had once traveled back to the prehistoric era 10,000 years ago for an experiment. Her original intention was to improve the world, but it backfired. Therefore, she returned to 1988, when time travel was just emerging, to correct her previous mistakes. The sinkholes that had appeared were actually caused by Caroline's failed experiments. Josh informed her that a huge sinkhole would appear again in 72 hours, even triggering a tsunami. They needed to spread the news to the public to minimize the damage. Caroline assured him that she would arrange it. But before that, she wanted to see young Gavin, Isaiah. Riley was worried, fearing that Caroline recognizing her biological son would change the history of him being adopted by his foster parents, which could cause Josh to disappear again. However, they soon realized that Caroline had no intention of revealing her identity to her son. Instead, she introduced Isaiah to his foster parents. Isaiah felt that the woman in front of him looked familiar, but he could not remember where he had seen her. Caroline did not elaborate, but seriously urged Isaiah to trust his foster parents, as they were the most trustworthy people. Then, Josh and Riley caught up with Caroline, who was preparing to leave. They all agreed that it was time to prevent the impending tsunami. Gavin and his party finally arrived near the tower. They prepared to face the scrutiny of the tower guards, with Levi and others hidden nearby observing the situation. Unexpectedly, the guards were cautious and asked Gavin why he was a new face. Gavin had already prepared an answer, saying that the previous delivery man was killed by Tomet, and this was his first time delivering goods. The guard finally agreed to let them pass. Little did they know, their every move was being closely monitored. Even Isaiah's grandfather, who was secretly following them, could not hide from the surveillance. The security director found their appearance suspicious and ordered the guards to arrest Gavin and his party. Eve and the others became panicked. Suddenly, an arrow flew out from the forest. It was done by Isaiah's grandfather. The hiding Levi and his party also rushed out and struggled with the gatekeeping guards. Lucas was hit by a strong electric stick and let out a cry of pain. Seeing more guards arriving, the group had to retreat, but Gavin was unable to escape. Eve was determined to save Gavin from the tower. Sam noticed footprints on the ground and believed that Isaiah's grandfather had escaped from here. As the old man was familiar with the tower, they decided to seek his help. The group followed the footprints and indeed found the old man in the forest. However, he advised Eve and the others to return, warning that the tower was too dangerous and going there would likely result in disaster. He promised to think of a way to save Gavin himself, but Eve wouldn't give up on Gavin. Left without options, he had no choice but to lead the group on a rescue mission. However, they soon realized that 2 people were missing from their party. It turned out that during the previous conflict, Scott and Lucas were the first to escape, but they lost their way and got separated from the main group. Looking at the electric shock marks on Lucas, Scott recalled a dead person in the camp whose burn marks were very similar. He worried that Lucas's life might be in danger and insisted on canceling his plan to infiltrate the tower. Instead, he led Lucas back to the camp. Before long, the two of them reached their destination. However, Lucas's injuries had worsened, and the red stripes on his body were much more visible than before. Everyone was at a loss, and given the current medical conditions, Lucas could only hope for the best. Veronica went out and brought back some herb medicine. Although she didn't know if it would help his injuries, at least it could alleviate some of the pain, a small token of her gratitude to him. But less than a day had passed, and the red stripes on Lucas's body had almost spread to his neck. His mental state was declining, and it seemed that he wouldn't have much longer to live. Meanwhile, Eve and her group were now preparing to infiltrate the tower under the old man's guidance to rescue Gavin. The old man knew of a drainage outlet in the underground tunnel of the tower, which could lead directly inside. As they were preparing to approach, a large eagle suddenly swooped down, grabbed a fawn from the ground, and disappeared in an instant. Everyone was left stunned. They would have to bypass this giant eagle to enter the drainage outlet. Eve instructed everyone to rush towards the drainage outlet after 3 seconds, while she stood up and began shouting loudly at the giant eagle. This tactic worked, and Eve quickly drew the eagle's attention, allowing the others to sneak into the drainage outlet. Just as the eagle was about to grab Eve's sexy body, the old man drew his bow and shot an arrow to ward it off. Eve was given a chance and managed to slip into the drainage outlet without any harm. Before long, the group finally reached the inside of the tower. This was the transportation tunnel at the very bottom of the tower, a place with which the old man was very familiar. If they could just pass through here and reach the security room, they could use the surveillance system to locate Gavin. But they soon ran into some engineers who had come for maintenance. The security guards immediately surrounded them, and the group was thrown into panic. Meanwhile, Gavin woke from his unconscious state, only to find himself within the confines of the tower. A small wound on his neck left him puzzled. Just then, a stern man appeared. It was James, the manager of the tower. Right off the bat, James admitted to being Gavin's father. Having heard quite a bit about his father, Gavin wasn't surprised. Instead, he questioned James with a hint of resentment as to why he hadn't sought him out over the years. James claimed he hadn't known Gavin was here and began to explain the origins of the tower. It turned out James was from Los Angeles, 2076, a time when human destruction had led to extreme scarcity of Earth's resources. The Lazarus Project was born out of necessity, intended to reverse the damage caused by humanity. They discovered that the natural resources from 10,000 years ago were abundant and the biological species well preserved. These resources and scientific achievements would be transported back to 2076 through the portal inside the tower. Gavin was still puzzled. He knew his grandfather and mother contributed to the creation of the tower, so why did they fall out with James? James got upset upon hearing that, and he refused to divulge any information. Gavin decided not to press the matter further, instead stating his purpose for being here. He wanted to return to 1988 to find his son. James then led Gavin to the center of the lab. There, a striking green light caught Gavin's attention. He was amazed to learn that they had developed Aurora, a time-traveling mechanism. James was immensely proud, explaining that the black ore contained uranium, which was used to power Aurora for time travel. Gavin was thrilled, thinking he could return to 1988. However, James quickly dashed his hopes, revealing that they only had a portal to 2076, not 1988. Gavin was stunned because his grandfather had mentioned the existence of a portal to 1988, but James promised he would find a way to help Gavin return to 1988 as long as Gavin agreed to stay. This proposition left Gavin deep in thought. What he truly desired was to reunite with his wife and child. James reiterated his promise to help Gavin achieve his wish, but Gavin remained skeptical of his father, believing that he was keeping something from him. James then produced a photo of Gavin as a child with his mother. He admitted to making mistakes in the past, which led to Gavin's mother and grandfather choosing to sever ties with him. Now, he hoped for a chance to make amends. Just then, he received an urgent report from his men. The next moment, Gavin and his father were in the multi-purpose tunnel where they found Eve and the others who had been captured. The three family members got a reunion. However, seeing his son James, the old man couldn't bring himself to be happy. He warned Gavin not to believe James's nonsense. Having been involved in the construction of the tower, the old man knew about the existence of the portal to 1988. James had to admit to lying to Gavin, but claimed it was only because he didn't want Gavin to leave. Gavin addressed his estranged father, saying that if he truly wanted to make amends, he should send everyone back to 1988 and release his grandfather. In the end, James agreed to all of Gavin's requests, seemingly repentant of his past wrongdoings. Later, Gavin and his group gathered around the portal to 1988. Sam, anxious for his daughter, was the first to step in. Subsequently, everyone else also entered the portal. An assistant nearby was somewhat puzzled, questioning why he would let his son leave again. James knew if he didn't let Gavin go, he would lose him forever. In an instant, they arrived at the beach coastline of 1988, where Josh and Riley were exchanging sweet nothings on a bench. They happened to run into Gavin and his party, who had just crossed over. Finally, the family of four was reunited. After everyone's excitement had subsided, Josh couldn't wait to share his experiences over the past few days. It's revealed that when they were discussing with Dr. Caroline on how to prevent sinkholes from appearing, she brought the two to a secret room. Inside, there were rows of old computers. Unexpectedly, Caroline had already started to develop a computer virus to destroy the ancient tower. She believed that only by doing this could she prevent the various sinkhole incidents triggered by the tower. Just as they sat down, all the computers suddenly shut down. Caroline guessed that there was a problem with the power supply, so Josh and Riley went to check the fuse box and found that only the fuse had blown out. They quickly restored the power. Caroline asked them to stay in place for a while to prevent the fuse from blowing out again. The two shared a smile and started to have fun inside the skating rink. However, Caroline's voice came out from the walkie-talkie. She said she had been discovered and asked Josh to cut off the power immediately. The last thing they heard from Caroline was a single message saying that don't forget to eat their cereal. When Josh and Riley rushed back to the secret lab, they found that Dr. Caroline had disappeared. Josh speculated that she must have been captured by the forces from the tower. Then he remembered her message and hurried to the kitchen. Sure enough, there was something hidden inside the cereal box, but the two had no idea what it was. After hearing this, Gavin and his party didn't expect that 1988 was also filled with undercurrents. Just then, the ground started to shake. Josh realized that a new sinkhole was about to appear, just like the one in Brea before. Because of the looming earthquake and the resulting tsunami, Gavin and his crew must dismantle the tower project to prevent this disaster. Dr. Caroline became a key figure. Fortunately, before she was captured, she left a signal receiver that could pinpoint her location at any time. Gavin decided to set out immediately to rescue her. According to the locator, Caroline was being held in a warehouse in the factory area. Levi found that there were quite a few guards around, especially two men who were on round-the-clock watch in the warehouse. Gavin decided to take a risk. They first used the main gate to distract the guards, then stealthily infiltrated and suddenly attacked, successfully resolving the two guards. The mother and son finally met, but this was not the time for pleasantries. Just as they were about to leave, they alerted the guards in the corridor. Levi volunteered to hold them off, but got shot. Fortunately, they were fast enough to escape and meet with Eve. They sped to a prearranged camp, but Levi's injury was serious. They needed to treat his wound immediately, but Caroline also had urgent matters to attend to. She needed to go home to improve the computer virus, fearing that any delay could cause more trouble. Gavin also realized that time was of the essence and that they needed enough manpower. A large group quickly arrived at Caroline's house. After a search, no enemies were found, but they could not let their guard down. Eve and the children were scattered to keep watch, while Gavin followed his mother to the secret basement. Unexpectedly, the virus data was hidden in a lampshade. Caroline wasted no time and continued editing after opening the computer. Gavin finally had a chance to ask about the specific steps to stop the tower. It turned out that Dr. Caroline planned to create a virus here, use the Hollywood sinkhole to return to the tower of 10,000 years ago, and only by uploading the virus there could they destroy the portal and prevent the appearance of sinkholes. However, Gavin realized something was wrong. If they destroyed the portal, how would everyone return to modern society? Caroline seemed to have foreseen this. After destroying the tower's mainframe, everyone would have to stay in that era. Gavin felt he must discuss this with his family. They had to stay together no matter what. After discussion, they decided to stay in 1988 and not go anywhere. Staying here was better than being in the ancient era. Eve seemed relaxed, but her thoughtful daughter knew that she was still worried about the injured Levi. On the other side, Sam and his daughter had finally finished treating Levi's wound. Once they arrived at Caroline's home, they quickly learned that the portal was about to disappear. Sam was of the opinion that they should return to the ancient era, as it was their only chance to return to modern society and reunite with his wife and children. On the contrary, Levi was determined to stay in 1988 and continue protecting Eve. Suddenly, Sam ran over and announced that two cars were approaching. It was clear that the tower forces were coming to cause trouble. Gavin ran to the basement. Fortunately, Caroline had just finished creating the computer virus, and they were quick enough to escape through the back door before the enemies broke in. The scene switches to the ancient world 10,000 years ago. Tai and the tribal chief Para were hunting down the exiles, Tamet and his remaining minions. They finally surrounded them in an open field. Just as the main force returned to the village, they happened to meet the injured Lucas seeking help. After being electrocuted by the guards at the tower, the red patterns on his body became more obvious. As a native, Para had heard of this kind of injury, but didn't know how to treat it. Unexpectedly, the captured Tamet spoke up, stating that there were healing herbs nearby. It wasn't surprising that he knew about this injury, as he had served the tower for a long time. Tamet proposed a condition. Once Lucas was cured, they must let him go. But Para flatly refused. Tamet had no choice but to propose a fair duel according to the old rules of the tribe. If he won, he would be free to leave. If he lost, he would stay and hand over the antidote. Para agreed this time, but Tamet suddenly revealed a cunning smile. His opponent in the duel was not Para, but Tai, who had just joined the tribe. Para was so angry that she ordered her men to take Tamet away. Tai knew that Para was worried about his safety, but he couldn't just watch his companion die because he was afraid. But Para knew that if Tai was the one to fight, there was no hope of winning, and he might even lose his life. But Tai was not one to fear death, and he was willing to take the challenge. Meanwhile, Scott and Veronica were also anxious. Given Lucas's current condition, it was doubtful if he could even last a few more hours. The only way to save him now was to get the antidote from Tamet. Suddenly, an idea struck Scott that could satisfy everyone. Not long after, Tamet was escorted by the tribespeople to the combat arena. A primitive and bloody duel was about to commence. Para announced the rules. The two were to fight until one party died or surrendered. With that, she shouted that the duel had begun. No one knew where Tai got the courage to dare to fight Tamet, who was well versed in combat. After a few rounds, he was so overwhelmed that he couldn't even lift his head. His friends on the sidelines frowned as they watched. As expected, Tamet easily knocked Tai's weapon away and threw him to the ground. All he had to do next was to deliver the fatal blow. However, Tamet hesitated, his eyes fixated on Para. Seeing this, Tai suddenly sprang up and counterattacked, knocking Tamet over and turning the tables. A somewhat unwilling Tamet threw away his weapon in surrender. Tai and Para were overjoyed. Before long, a bowl of medicinal soup was served to Lucas. Without further ado, they poured the soup into Lucas's mouth. Under everyone's hopeful gaze, Lucas groaned a few times, and the red patterns on his body disappeared rapidly. Lucas's life was finally saved, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Only Scott seemed a bit evasive, sneaking out and heading to the room where Tamet was held. It turned out that the two had quietly reached an agreement before. Tamet deliberately lost to Tai and handed over the antidote, while Scott would release Tamet afterwards. This was the win-win solution Scott had thought of. However, having watched the duel, Scott didn't notice Tamet going easy at all, so he decided to break the agreement and not let Tamet go. To his surprise, Tamet just chuckled. He said that a crucial ingredient was missing from the antidote Lucas had drunk. Scott was panicked. He didn't dare gamble Lucas's life. In the end, he had to comply, cutting the ropes on Tamet's hands. Once free, Tamet immediately knocked Scott down and expressed his intention to make everyone pay the price. Meanwhile, the people sitting outside the camp had no idea that Tamet had escaped his cage. They were still immersed in the peace of the wonderful night. Only Lucas felt somewhat unwell. His right hand was completely numb. Clearly, there was something wrong with Tamet's antidote. Poor Scott could only sit in the corner shivering with fear. The scene transitions to the world of 1988, where Gavin and his group are headed towards the Hollywood Sinkhole. They plan on sending Caroline, Sam, and his daughter on the last leg of their journey. However, along the way, Caroline seems to be burdened with worries. Upon inquiry, it turns out that the process of uploading the virus to the tower's mainframe is complicated. They have to break through the highest level of gene lock, which can only be unlocked by two people in the world, Gavin and his father, James. This indicates that Gavin must return to the ancient times with Caroline. Just as they fall into silence, Sam rushes over to report that the forces of the tower are guarding up ahead. Unexpectedly, the opposition has anticipated Caroline's plan. Gavin and his group quickly devise an excellent strategy. They have Caroline appear suddenly to distract the guards, and then Levi charges in on a quad bike. Just as the guards are flustered, Gavin also appears from the side on a quad, giving the guards no time to react. In an instant, they are knocked into the sinkhole by Gavin. Having cleared the last obstacle, it's time for everyone to say their goodbyes. Gavin has made up his mind. He approaches Eve and the others, revealing his need to travel back to ancient times. Surprisingly, they express their desire to accompany Gavin. They believe that a family should stay together no matter what. Afterwards, Eve approaches Levi, expressing gratitude for helping her through the most challenging times in her life. Unfortunately, these feelings can only be savored in her heart. Levi, realizing Eve's intent to let go, decides to stop being a doormat. He plans to stay in 1988 and start a new life. Surprisingly, after all the twists and turns, only Levi stays behind. After bidding a reluctant farewell to him, everyone stands by the sinkhole. An impatient Caroline is the first to jump in, followed closely by Sam and his daughter. But when it's Gavin's turn, he suddenly hallucinates a scene of Eve's death. Faced with everyone's inquiries, Gavin doesn't dare to voice his fears, but decisively jumps into the sinkhole with his family, indicating that there are more adventures to come in Season 3. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.